And I just want to acknowledge our sponsors. We appreciate them very much for today's Farmers Market Bootcamp webinar. Our sponsors include UT Extension, the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, and the Tennessee Association of Farmers Markets. And we also appreciate those who have collaborated with us to provide this webinar, the Farmers Market Coalition, the Center for Profitable Agriculture, as well as Oklahoma State University. And as many of you are aware, attending all 5 webinars this week will fulfill a TAEP educational requirement in the following producer diversification sectors: agritourism, fruits and vegetables, and value added. For additional information regarding educational programs for TAEP requirements, please contact Grant Palmer at TDA, and I will notify TDA of the names of those who attend all 5 webinars. If you're joining by phone and you wish to have us document your attendance for TAEP credit, please self-identify yourself now. Just tell me who you are, what your phone number is, so that I can match that with what I'm seeing on the screen. If there's anybody joining us by phone, if you don't mind, please self-identify yourself now.
Patricia Lynch, it's 423-388-8841.
Okay, Patricia Lynch. Thank you. 423-388-8841. Okay. Great. Anybody else?
Emmy White, and it's 423-718-9684.
That's 423-718-9684. Emmy White. Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. Anybody else on the phone?
Yes. Kelly Doyle, 615-419-0960.
That was Kelly Doyle, 615-419-0960.
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yes. Anybody else?
Yes, Katie Bates.
Okay, I hear Katie Bates. Katie, could you give me your number?
931-629-6749.
Okay, I have 931-629-6749.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you, Katie. Anybody else?
James Graves.
James Graves?
Yes, 931-703-8151.
Okay, so that's James Graves, 931-703-8151. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Carla Rich.
Okay. Carla, what's your number?
931-397-3353.
931-397-3353. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Anybody else?
It's Heather Shipley.
Okay, Heather.
423-963-6624.
And that was 423-963-6624. Thank
Yes.
you. Okay. Anybody else? Get all the phone calls. All right, great. And I see a couple in the chat box as well.
There's a couple hands raised, Hal. Looks like James Graves and Adam Thompson.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. James Graves, did you have a question? James, did you have another question, or did you just maybe inadvertently raise your hand? Okay. Okay. How about Adam Thompson? Did you have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I sure can.
Okay. Yeah, my phone number is 865-661-2317.
Okay, Adam, I got that. Thank you, sir. Okay. Anybody else? Thank you for that. Okay, so I wanted to mention that I'll be sending an evaluation to everybody after Friday's webinar to everybody that registered. And I hope you'll plan to take a few minutes to complete that evaluation so we can measure the impact of the Farmers Market Boot Camps. And your response helps us greatly as we plan future webinars and workshops. Okay, so now we get to introduce our speaker today. Katie Myhre with Farmers Market Coalition is going to be our presenter. And Katie is a technology research manager with Farmers Market Coalition, and she's been an advocate for creative and profitable adoption of technology within food and farm communities for her entire career. With work spanning various areas of food system advocacy, she has managed multiple markets in Minneapolis, and her central focus has been supporting small food and farm business viability on a regional scale, with an emphasis on a grassroots approach. Katie joined the Farmers Market Coalition in August of 2020, and she develops resources and analyzes SNAP and EBT related technology. Katie, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you now. We have about 140 folks who've registered, farmers market vendors and managers. Some will be watching this later, and many are here live with us today. So we look forward to the information that you have to share with us.
Well, fantastic. Thanks so much, Hal. It's great to join you all. Appreciate that generous introduction. Let me just get my slides started. I also have a colleague joining me here today, and I'll introduce her in just a moment. But we're here today to talk about EBT, nutrition incentives. So I know many of you are vendors, some of you are farmers, we might have some market managers in the audience. So there might be different approaches and different considerations that you might be making for deciding, maybe whether or not to get authorized for SNAP EBT, or maybe you're already authorized and want some, advice on some of the other pieces that come after the authorization, such as selection of technology or design of programs. So we're here today to kind of cover a broad range of topics. Hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions, or at least point you to some resources that might work for your stage and for your type of business. But we want to keep today really, conversational. We don't always have all the answers. We just try to share what we've seen other markets do and vendors do, and try to give you some considerations as you approach this process. So before I introduce Rachel, I just want to share a few minutes about the Farmers Market Coalition. So we work nationwide to support farmers market operators with the goal of strengthening farmers markets and their operations. So a core part of my role, as Hal mentioned, is to really support market operators and farmers in choosing EBT. And some of that involves getting authorized, right? You got to get FNS-authorized. So there's a lot of steps to that process. But really FMC we're an education center. So we build resources and we share resources from market manager to market manager. We do some advocacy on behalf of market organizers, giving farmers market operators visibility and recognition of the work that they do. And then we also facilitate networks. So we have a variety of networks and communities of practice that we facilitate in order to help help practitioners really share their insights, because you all are the experts in this work, and we just simply want to facilitate your conversations with each other. So Hal already mentioned a bit about me. I tagged some resources here that I've recently created that might be interesting to you if you are choosing technology, but we'll get into those. We'll circle back to those at the end of the presentation. And really the core of my work is providing technical assistance around EBT technology, developing resources to support the selection of this technology. So right now I'm going to turn the mic over to Rachel for a minute, and she's going to introduce herself very briefly, and then we'll get into the content. So go ahead, Rachel.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Ward. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Farmers Market Support Project Manager at FMC, and my work really focuses around nutrition incentive, SNAP incentive programs. So once you have your EBT machine and you're accepting SNAP, if you want a way to boost and incentivize folks to come in and utilize that form of payment at your market. Incentive programs can be a great way to do that. And I primarily work and lead our partnership with the National Nutrition Incentive Hub, which provides training and technical assistance and support to grantees of the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program, which is the big federal grant program that funds SNAP incentives. It was formerly known as FINI. Some of you may know it as that. So I'll be talking later about, once you have your equipment and your machines and everything, how do you promote your program? How do you evaluate it? But I will turn it back over to Katie to dive in.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, let's get into it. So before we get started, I kind of wanted to introduce this approach that we encourage you all to take. I think a lot of markets just kind of want to get in and get authorized and start going, but we encourage kind of a more holistic approach to it. So the FMC team, alongside the Nutrition Incentives Hub, which Rachel mentioned, sort of developed this comprehensive resource that is the Farm Direct Incentives Guide site, which is a website that has a range of resources on the topic of EBT, incentive-based programs. And how we went about that process is we developed this Piper model, we called it. So it starts out with planning, learning the basics of incentives and SNAP authorization. Then it goes on to implementing, promoting the program so that you can really bring in some new shoppers and benefit from all the work you've done in the planning and implementation phase. And then we move on to evaluate. How do we know that it's working? How can we, what indicators show us that we're doing well, we're making money, we're increasing our relationships with community members? There could be a variety of ways to evaluate it. And then reiterate is let's keep it going. Let's turn that data into more resources so we can keep expanding our program and keep operating it. So we're going to use that model today. We're going to focus in the first stage of that Piper model. So we're going to look at plan, implement, promote, and evaluate. Most of our time together is going to be on planning and how to implement. So within the planning category, we're going to talk about doing a little capacity, getting a sense of what your strengths are on your farm business team or your market managing team, and where you might have some gaps and what implications that might have for which, whether or not you get authorized right away or what you do before you get authorized. We're going to talk a little bit about administrative and financial systems, which are really key to making a smooth SNAP program. And then we're going to talk about your markets model. And I know that not all of you are farmers markets, so we'll talk about kind of the business model a little bit too of considerations that farmers and vendors might make in choosing to be SNAP authorized. And then we'll move to implement. So this is when, you're actually going forward with the authorization application with USDA. You're setting up your accounting systems and you're choosing your EBT technology terminal. So you're getting ready to swipe those EBT cards at the market. That's kind of the implement phase. And then Rachel's going to jump in and talk a little bit about promotion and evaluation. So, promotion, making sure that the community members that you invite feel welcome, invited, and you have systems in place to make sure that they have access to that information about when the market is, information like that. And then evaluation. So, timelines of the project, are you certain like grant periods or are you collecting data across many sites? What systems are you using for that? But I'll let Rachel get into that when we get there. So before we start, I just want to mention a brief history of EBT. So EBT has been around at this point for many decades, since the 1960s. It emerged as a permanent program in 1964, and it was primarily run on food stamps, as many of you might know, which are those paper coupons, which were a really easy system for farmers markets, right? It's very much like cash. So that was kind of the predominant system at farmers markets, where shoppers could come in and use their food stamps. But in the 90s and early 2000s, we saw the transition to electronic benefit transfer, which is the EBT system in place today. So farmers markets, with this shift, they could no longer accept individual paper vouchers. So the central terminal model is sort of emerging at this point as a solution. Which means that, a market operator might have a central terminal where a shopper can come in and swipe their EBT card in exchange for tokens. So if any of you have sold at farmers markets with EBT authorization, you probably know what I'm talking about. And I'll get a little bit more into that in just a minute. And then in 2004, there was the full transition to EBT. So it was officially required in all 50 states, meaning there was no option other than using this EBT system. Food stamps were no longer an option. So I mentioned briefly in the last slide, this central terminal model. And what I mean by that is that info booth at the center of the market. So there is, one market manager is authorized as the EBT retailer, and that market manager will allow customers to come up, swipe their SNAP card, and in exchange, they'll get tokens or paper scripts. Shoppers then take these tokens or paper script to vendors in exchange for food. So this is probably not explaining much new to some of you who already are familiar with this model, but we like to start here because this is the predominant model that we see at farmers markets across the US. So it's a nice, little level set here. So often when we work with markets and farmers, the question is, when they want to get authorized, is what are we going to need for it and how do we pay for it? Today, we're going to talk about taking a slightly different approach. We're not going to jump right into what do I need and how do I pay for it? We want to make sure that you're making the right decision and you have knowledge of your own skill sets and your gaps before you jump right in. So we like to start with assessing the need. So getting in touch with your community and making sure that there is a viable opportunity to run a program like this. And then assessing the capacity within your business or within your organization. Do you have a team in place to help support you? What kind of relationships do you need in your community to make sure that this program can get off on the right foot? Once you've assessed those needs and capacity, then we'll kind of move to imagining the operations of the model. So we'll look at what needs to be in place on site in order to make sure these systems run smoothly. And then from there, that'll inform what systems we choose. So do we choose a mobile phone to run SNAP EBT at our market that runs on a cellular network? Or do we choose, a wireless terminal that can swipe the card physically and operates that way? So there's a few options there, and we'll get into those. So the first step is considering what the community need is for SNAP. So who are the relationships in your community, the public health organizations or the community organizations that might be able to help you understand, what kind of community need is there for SNAP and what are the current barriers for SNAP shoppers in, buying direct from a farmer or buying direct from a food vendor. Understanding this will really help you figure out how to, for example, build your promotional campaigns. It'll help you assess whether or not it's the right time and the right space and setting for an EBT authorization for your farmers market. So some questions that we like to ask, and I know this is a little bit of a daunting slide. We'll be able to share these slides with you afterwards, but we like to, spend some time asking questions in this phase. So we want to assess our capacity. Things on the administration side, these are really not exciting questions, right? Do we have a checking account? Is there a physical address for the farmers market? If we don't have a checking account, how are we going to plan on paying farmers? Will we issue checks or electronic reimbursement, and how often? Another piece is who's going to be the address on your authorization paperwork. These may seem like obvious questions, but they require some thinking through before you enter that authorization process, because you'll need answers for these questions and you'll need a plan. So some considerations within the administration side of this is if you don't have any financial infrastructure, if you don't have a checking account, you might need to spend some time getting that set up. You might have to make some decisions about your business that would be amenable to getting authorized in that way. If you do have a strong financial infrastructure, you have checking accounts, you have a formalized, farmers market structure, you have a business that's running pretty effectively, you might be at a phase where you're thinking, well, what EBT systems are going to fit in with my system rather than how can I build a system around EBT? So those are kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum, and figuring out how either to make the decision to build the right checking account financial systems around EBT or vice versa. And then thinking long-term is really important in this phase too. So I asked about an address for the market and an address on the authorization paperwork. These decisions can have long-term impacts. FNS uses a physical address to do all communication with applicants during the authorization process. So it's really, really critical that you have a reliable address on file. So that might be, spending some time and thinking about your, if you have a farm business, for example, you might be pretty static, you own land, you're going to be there for a long time. That might be a very easy decision. If you're a farmer's market that operates, with a community board, you have different board presidents, different market managers coming through, that might be a trickier decision. Deciding who that person is going to be, making sure that they're going to be with the organization for a long time. And then the last piece of this is, making sure that you have a place to write all this information down as you go through this process is really important, because say a market manager leaves the market and they had all this information, you might be, scrambling to rebuild the authorization paperwork without them there. So moving on from administration, and we'll get a little bit more into some of these questions when we talk more about authorization, but fundraising, these programs cost money. You might have a plan for that, the cost that it's going to take in the first year. For example, we talked about that central terminal model right here. So somebody's got to staff that info booth, right? Or if you're a vendor, you might have to train your staff on how to use the new technology. So what kind of capacity is it going to take for your team? And what kind of funds do you need to raise? Either within your team, do you need to seek out grant funds, apply for grants? What's required there? So some considerations to answer this question are your board. So if you're a farmer's market, do you have a board and can they help? They might know how to access some of this money. If you're an individual vendor, I would just say, these are the business decisions that you have to make annually, right? You're always making decisions on costs and benefit. So get really specific on what you need, and that will help you make the right decision as well as help you pursue the right funding. And then on that note with funding, the financial position of your business and your market is a key part of this too. So do you have, $1,000 to buy the EBT terminal up front? Are you pretty tight on cash flow this time of year because you're spending all your money on seeds and inputs? Maybe that you can afford a smaller lump sum up front, and then you can pay monthly for the rest of it. So you can kind of pay off the device as the season goes on. Another key consideration for this is that there are free equipment programs, both within states and then nationwide through MarketLink. So we encourage you to look beyond the price tag here. We want you to figure out the right equipment for you, but you do need to know what these differences cost so you can make a plan. And I'm seeing some information about okay. Daniel's asking, where would you find grants for this specifically? We'll get into the prices a little bit more, I think, later. But the grants, they'll depend on, your state. I would look in your state, if your state has an EBT equipment program, for example, or if there's local organizations that will fund it. So sometimes public health organizations or insurance foundations will sometimes fund this kind of program. If you have a farmers market association in Tennessee, which I don't know if you do, they sometimes fund this kind of thing. It just really depends on your community. And that's why we're still at the assessing capacity stage in this. We're saying, we're asking, are there grants out there in my area? Doing some research on that before you jump into the process. That's exactly what we want you to do at this phase. And if anyone has any ideas for grants, to answer Danielle's question, please feel free to jump in the chat and share, because you all would know your state better than I would. Any other questions well, we'll just move on, and then feel free to kind of jot questions in the chat. Rachel can look it over, and then we'll have some time at the end to answer more questions as well. So assessing our capacity, we talked about admin and finances. Now we're looking a little bit more at operations and staffing. So we talked about the finances required to hire someone to run on-site operations, but that's not limited just to market hours. There's off-hour reconciliation that has to happen, promotion. There's a few more parts of the job description required to run a SNAP program, right? So we need to assess what we have on our team. Do we have a low capacity team where we might need to rely on volunteers, for example? Or do we have a pretty strong, robust, high capacity team where, we might be choosing between software systems to help, run our network of markets, or run our, if I'm a farm with 10 different market sites, it's the right software that helps, gain visibility of all these different sites and the sales at each of them. So there's a spectrum there, but just knowing kind of what your team's strengths are and what you might need to hire for is a really key part of this process. Partnerships are also part of this. So who do you have relationships with? I think somebody in the chat just mentioned public health organization. So county health departments are a great example of a partnership. Can they support you in some way? They might have an understanding of some of the resources out there in terms of grants, in terms of volunteers even. They can help you kind of get this program up and running, and they might help you promote it as well. Getting down into the nitty gritty a little bit, the weekly administration requires, so thinking about how many hours you have available in your current business to spend on reporting, accounting, and on-site redemptions. If you don't know these numbers, ask each other, ask somebody who's already done it. Say, in your first year, how many hours did you need to spend on this? You're kind of a similar size as me. I would encourage you to ask other farmers markets, other vendors, and other farmers that question, because that will really depend on size and scale and a lot of things. So if you're at a farmer's market, one question that we would encourage you to ask is how many SNAP eligible vendors are currently part of your market, and how excited are they about this idea? If they're really bought in, that's going to, encourage you to move the process along a little bit faster. If they're a little bit more hesitant because they might be wanting to authorize themselves, work with them to figure out the best system. And the question for that is, can your vendors be the authorized retailers? And I know a lot of you are vendors on this call. We'd encourage you to look into whether authorization is right for you. It could be, it can involve a faster payback from your state funding for this program rather than going through the farmers market. So there's possibilities there. And then finally, connectivity. So I don't know what the internet is like in Tennessee, but sometimes in Minnesota, it can really be a pain depending on where you are in the state. So if you have a market that's operating in a rural space or, very urban in the middle of a bunch of big buildings, what kind of cellular connection do you have? Is it reliable? Often farmers markets don't know this before they pick a certain EBT terminal or they start a program, and they don't have a backup plan. So we'd encourage you to kind of look at like how strong is the signal at our market, and will this even work to run a reliable EBT program? Okay, so now we're going to get a little bit into what the process is for authorizing. So maybe some of you have gone through this. The organization that authorizes for SNAP is called the Food and Nutrition Service branch of the USDA. So we all know the USDA. FNS is a part of the USDA, and they specifically oversee SNAP. So they'll be the ones that you work with to get authorized. And they have a website where you can start your authorization process online. So you jump online, you start filling out the application, and there's a variety of information that FNS requires of you through that process. One of those pieces is an address. Once you get through that online application, it's super important that you have a reliable physical address that they can mail you things, because they do mail all of their correspondence after that authorization to that address. It's a security thing for them. They want to maintain that system. And we know a lot of farmers markets and vendors who change addresses. They sometimes miss that paperwork. So make sure you have an address that's reliable. You can also change that address, but if you do move, make sure you notify USDA of that change once you're authorized. And the mailing address is where they also send the reauthorization paperwork. Once you get that authorization in hand, you'll be selecting between a list of third-party processors. So what a third-party processor is they're the group that basically facilitates your transactions on site. So the USDA says, thumbs up, your farm business is ready to accept SNAP. And then the third-party processor is the one that actually captures the transactions for you. So the third-party processors manage that flow of transaction data to the state program and back to your bank account. So if you choose when you choose an EBT terminal, the third-party processor is the one that's managing that transaction on the terminal. So they're also the ones that might often sell you that SNAP EBT device. And we'll talk about the device options in a few minutes here. But that third-party processor might be on this list from USDA, but this list is not exhaustive. This list I pulled from the USDA website, but there's hundreds, if not thousands, of third-party processors out there that also manage things like credit and debit that you might already be working with one and not even know it. So then finally, once you get that taken care of, you've selected your third-party processor, you've got a device. Then your market can start accepting EBT. So that's just kind of the quick overview. And here's a little bit more details about the SNAP authorization process. So applying is this 3-step application process. You get an account, you fill the application out online, and then you mail the supporting document to FNS to complete your file. This process can take, a few weeks. It can take a few months. It really depends on the timing of year, how busy FNS is. They have some staffing shortages at this point. So we know that it's taking a little bit longer for some folks to get their authorization paperwork back. But it shouldn't take more than a few months, I would say. And you can check the status of your application using that online system to make sure that it's moving forward. To complete the application, you'll need a few details that you'll be mailing in. So you'll need a photo identification and social security card for all owners, partners, and corporate officers. So they say that you don't need a social security card for nonprofits. There's some exceptions to this rule, but generally speaking, we put this on here so you know that this is likely required upfront. Since a farmer's market is often owned by a nonprofit, the cooperative or that nonprofit can designate a responsible official. And this responsible official is kind of that person that I mentioned earlier, the really reliable person with an address that can be accountable to the application and make sure things are moving forward. So if you're a business owner, this is an easy question. It's you. You're the business owner. You're the responsible official. If you're a farmer's market, it might be the board chair. It might be the market manager. It really will depend. Just make sure you're picking somebody who's, when they choose to leave, if they choose to leave the market, they're going to make changes on that application to ensure that there's smooth turnover. And then you'll need the completed certification signature statement. So you'll just do this online, and then any business licenses that you have. So this maybe more applies to a farmer's business than a market, but it will just depend. So here's just kind of a bit of an overview of that process of getting authorized. So talking a little bit about SNAP accounting. So, when you get your SNAP program up and running, and now we're kind of in the implementation phase, it does require a little bit of extra bookkeeping and documentation. So often what we see farmers markets doing, if they have a token program, so remember back to that single that single swipe model with the central terminal, if the farmer or the farmers market is issuing tokens, they'll have to get those tokens back at the end of the day, which means that the SNAP amounts that they swipe on the terminal might not equal the tokens that they get back. So shoppers might ask for $20 worth of tokens and only spend 15. So those are two numbers that you have to track to make sure that you're showing how many you've issued and then how many have been you've been distributing and then redeemed. So your tracking system should track these four things at minimum: how many tokens you have on hand at any time, because those tokens are currency. So they're basically treated like cash at your market. So you got to make sure you have a handle on how many you have. You want to track how many you distribute, so how many you give out to shoppers every day. Then you want to track how many you get back from vendors at the end of the day. And then how many are, what's the difference there? So how many tokens are outstanding or unredeemed at any given time? There are great resources on this within FMC's SNAP guide. We have a pretty comprehensive SNAP guide that we encourage you to kind of refer back to after this presentation, as well as the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit. It's a fantastic resource to make sure you're operating everything in the ways that kind of answer to the legal and liability side of this model. So I wanted to go through a couple examples of authorization. So I know we've got a range of businesses here. The first example I'm going to talk about, which I've already spoken about a few times, is the central terminal model where the farmer's market is the one who's authorized. So again, in this single swipe system, a shopper is going to swipe their SNAP card and receive tokens or script, this paper script that they can go spend with eligible vendors. Under this system, it's really critical that vendors know which currencies they can accept for which foods. So this is kind of, a system of trust where the vendors learn those rules and then accept that as cash accordingly. And then at the end of the market, the vendors will bring those tokens of script back to the market manager for counting and reimbursement. So often market managers at the end of the day, they'll send somebody around to each of the vendor booths. They'll take note of, okay, this is $150 worth of tokens. I'll take the tokens back from you. You're on my list and I owe you $150. And then they'll issue a check for that vendor within some timeline. For some markets it's the same day. For others, it's 2 weeks. It just really depends. So another example for a farmer's market is that the market is not authorized, but there's a community organization that is a partner that is the authorized FNS retailer. So in this scenario, there's a partner organization that sets up a booth. They run EBT transactions at that booth. And it's very much like the central terminal model. They issue the EBT tokens or script, and then those shoppers spend those with vendors, and then they collect them at the end of the market day. So this is a great example of an option for someone or for an organization, farmers market, that doesn't have the capacity to run this on their own, but they really want to see this program possible. So we'd encourage you to kind of look at the organizations in your region and see who might be interested in providing this kind of service. So it could be food banks, it could be nonprofits, community centers, foundations, or insurance companies. It depends on, in this example, Alchemist in California, it's a community development corporation. So maybe they're involved in a little bit of economic development work. That could also be an example of a key organization that could do this work with you. And lastly is the vendors get authorized. So I know a lot of you are vendors on this call, and you might be considering getting authorized. There's a lot of benefits to being authorized. It's just that you can take another type of currency, right? You don't have to turn a customer away. You're also able to get paid more quickly. If you swipe in your EBT, if a customer swipes their EBT card, you're waiting for a direct reimbursement from the state rather than a reimbursement from the state to get to your market manager, then to get to your business. So it's a direct transfer, and it'll give you a lot of flexibility in sales to community members. So you could be selling EBT at your farm stand. You can be selling it at the farmer's market. You can sell it on farm. There's a variety of settings that you can kind of go to. Whereas if you're just selling in a market that's authorized, you can only sell through that market to EBT customers. So the decision will really depend on the farmer and how their kind of market channels are set up. Maybe you only are a part of one market and have a great EBT program. That's great. Invest in that community program. But the consideration about getting authorized is really about flexibility and offering your products to more community members. And farms and farmers markets are eligible to get FNS authorized and get free equipment for a limited, I think for a 2-year period through MarketLink. And we'll send a link, we'll have an explicit link at the end about MarketLink. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes on considerations about technology, and I think then I'll toss it over to Rachel and make sure we still have about 10 minutes for questions and answers. So I really just want to introduce the 3 types of technology that are out there to accept EBT. The first is wired terminals. So think kind of old school grocery store on this one. Dial up internet access potentially, or like plugging something into a wall where it relies on kind of that phone line connection. This could be an option for a partnership if you have it with a grocery store or a semi-permanent or permanent market structure. The most common that we see are wireless terminals. And that was I'll show you some examples in just a moment. But this is kind of the most common category that we see, that they connect either to Wi-Fi or a cellular connection. And then mobile terminals are very, very similar. And in fact, we see some overlap here. So mobile terminals are devices that connect to cellular networks, and they use smartphone apps, or they use some kind of app on a terminal device. So I'm a visual person. I think seeing pictures is really helpful. So here's some examples of mobile terminals that have smartphone capabilities in some cases. So the Clover PAX A920 and PAX S920, they all kind of function like smartphones, but they're payment terminals with swiping devices. TotalPay Go is an example of a program that you can use on your existing smartphone, and through MarketLink you can get access to this app for free for 2 years, and then you just get the printer for free alongside of it to print receipts. This Verifone can kind of fit into both the mobile and the wireless categories, because it can both rely on Wi-Fi and a cellular connection. But for all these devices, you will need a cellular contract. So that's another component of this process, is paying AT&T for that cellular connection, if that's how it works. So somebody asked earlier about price ranges. The Clovers, they can run $1,500 about, and it depends. You might get a deal from a third-party processor. The Verifone is probably between $500 and $1,000, and then Total Pay Go is a monthly fee of, I think it's at this point about $30 a month to enable the technology to accept the transactions. And each third-party processor has a different transaction fee. So you'll have to look at that transaction fee and look at that contract to make sure that you're building your cost of the products around that, that margin that you'll need. So wireless, you'll see a lot of similarities between these two, but there's a little bit more variation on some of the terminals here. So the printer is built in, for example, in the Verifone and the First Data. Opportunity to swipe a card. You put the key here is the pin pad device. So each of these devices have pin setups. So EBT requires a customer being able to type in a pin. So that's why you'll see these pin pads showing up here. And finally, wired. These are technically capable to be wired, where you can plug a cord into one side of them and plug them right into a wall. That's really great if you have the opportunity to do that, where you can plug it right in through an Ethernet cord to the internet. That's going to be the most reliable. EBT transactions can take a lot of power. So if you have the opportunity to plug something into a wall, I'd always recommend it. But very few markets and vendors have this opportunity. And that's what makes it a challenge. And so we have a resource down here, the EBT device category overview, that goes into these options a little bit further if you want to kind of compare and contrast a little bit more. So the question of how do we pay for it? I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We have, there are some states with state contracts that actually pay for the equipment. So as a farmer, as a farmer's market, you can go to your state and say, I'd like to get free EBT equipment for my market or for my business. What are my options? And they might present you one or two options, and you essentially can only choose from those two options. Market Link is the other option. So it's a smart device based equipment program for those eligible, which is any farmer or farmer's market, I think in the US for the most part. So I misspoke, it's only a program fee for 1 year included, but they'll send you a Bluetooth reader, and I think maybe they're not sending the printers anymore, but that used to be part of the deal. And then just one quick note, a lot of markets are thinking, well, can I sell to my Snap customers online? The short answer is not yet, but hopefully soon. So we're going to be hosting Market Link for a webinar on April 7th through Farmers Market Coalition. It'll be in the morning on April 7th. If you are interested in online Snap and whether or not that could be possible for your business. So right there, I'm going to leave it, or I'm going to turn it off to Rachel, and then we'll open it up after Rachel's finished up for questions.
Thanks, Katie. And I've been trying to answer questions in the chat as they come in, so hopefully we don't have too much to get to at the end, but definitely throw those in, and Katie can start to answer too as I'm presenting. Katie did a really good job of covering the planning and the implementing side, but promotion is also a really essential part of SNAP programs. So that whole adage of you build it and they will come does not usually apply to SNAP programs, because it's not very intuitive that folks would know to come to a farmer's market or a farm to spend their SNAP benefits, unless you have a really great state SNAP department that's advertising that to folks as they're getting authorized. So the onus really falls on the farmer's market or the farmer to promote the program, and word of mouth is often how we hear that SNAP benefits can be used at markets. And it can be a hard thing to measure, but there's lots of different ways that you can facilitate that buzz. There's a promote guide or promotion guide on our Farm Direct Incentives guide site, which I linked at the beginning of the presentation. It has a lot of excellent resources that can help you, and a couple of ideas to get you started. So community involvement is the first one. Really important to make sure that you are doing some asset mapping or having some community conversations to help to understand where and how to reach folks that use SNAP. Try to stay away from monoliths and assumptions that are rooted in stigma about who uses SNAP, because we know that so many different types of folks take advantage of the program, and that the population is constantly changing. Some markets choose to create community advisory councils or community ambassador programs that can help with SNAP outreach and promotion. And I'm going to put in the chat a link to a great webinar that we did around community ambassador programs that you all should check out the recording for. Second, partnerships are really important when thinking about promoting your SNAP program. If you don't already have really close ties to low-income communities, lean heavily on those partners that you know that do, and work with them to help spread the word. So some ideas to think about: your county DHS office, your local food pantries, food banks, your workforce development or unemployment offices, local schools, Head Start programs, places of worship, community centers. Really figure out who you want to work with and how you will work with them in ways that aren't extractive of the community. So try to think of how you can make it a two-way partnership. For example, maybe you allow that partner to come and table at your market in exchange for you going and presenting to their group to talk about your SNAP program in your market. Your partnership activities can be as simple as giving out flyers or talking to a class, or as complex as having tours come through the market and explaining how the farmers market works, or everywhere in between. Marketing and messaging is really incredibly important. You definitely need some materials to spread the word about the program. So think about creating some flyers, or work with within your state networks to get on their marketing materials. And hand them out everywhere you go. So everywhere that you're promoting your market or your farm, you should be talking about how you accept SNAP. It's another form of payment that you're accepting, and you should be promoting it in the same way that you promote accepting credit, debit, and cash. And make sure it's loud and proud on your website, in your presentations, on your market banner. You don't want to shy away from talking about it, because then it makes people feel shy to use it and take advantage of the program. So you really want to be out there. And do some testing with community members to find language that resonates with them without perpetuating stigma or stereotypes. So remember that people really are more than their methods of payment. So we often fall into this trap of calling folks SNAP recipients, but really SNAP is how they're paying. It doesn't define them as a customer. So instead of SNAP recipient, I would encourage y'all to think about rephrasing to say, customer paying with SNAP, or a customer that used their SNAP benefits at the market today. And that can really, just that shift, that simple little shift there, can really help to make your program more open and inclusive. And then at the market, signage is really important. This example here on this slide is a signage, or is a sign that's up at a lot of Georgia markets. It should be really clear to anyone that's walking into your market or your farm stand that first, you accept SNAP, and two, where they need to go to find more information. So if you have an info booth that folks come to, make sure that there's signage, that it's really clear and obvious. Make sure each of your vendors have a sign that says that they accept SNAP, so it's clear. We had a lot of conversations and questions about what products are eligible. So if you're confused about it, other folks may be confused about it as well. So the easier that you can make that for folks, the more utilized the program will be. And train your staff and your vendors to be friendly and open to all customers, and to intervene and to call out if they see discriminatory treatment or microaggressions or anything like that. You really want to create some code of conduct kind of guidelines for your market and your vendors, and think about SNAP, customers using SNAP specifically too. And then last, we know that the population that receives SNAP is constantly changing as folks ebb and flow between jobs, their renewals expire, life circumstances change. So it's really important for you to always be promoting your SNAP program, not just at the beginning of the season or the end of the season or the beginning of a month, but promote it even to customers that don't currently use SNAP. A lot of SNAP sales come from customers that started coming to the market long before they ever received benefits. And the way that they know to use their benefits at the market is because they saw those signs when they were at the market otherwise. So lots of great resources on that promotion guide. And then Katie, if you can go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about evaluation and turn it over. So it's really important to know if your SNAP program is reaching the community that you want to serve, if it's generating revenue for your vendors, if it's worth the admin burden. There's an evaluation guide on our Farm Direct Incentives Guide site as well, that can help get you started. But we know there's lots of different types of data that you can collect. So really figuring out what makes the most sense for you and for your market or your farm. What questions do you want answered, and then collect the data to answer those questions. We know that folks get survey fatigue. So really think about any data that you collect should be for a reason, and you should have a plan for how you're going to use that data. And you should be sharing with the community that you're collecting it from how you plan to use that data, and sharing it back to them. So some different ideas of data that you could collect. You could look at your number of unique customers paying with SNAP, your average transaction amount. You could look at the ebb and flow of how much SNAP is distributed or redeemed at different days of the month to see if you have heavier usage at the beginning of the month or the end of a month. Asking folks how they heard about the program can really help with your outreach efforts. Looking at if folks are coming more often or repeat visits. You can also ask those demographic questions or those common satisfaction surveys. And for vendors, you're looking at that the data that Katie talked about, but you could also ask about how the revenue has impacted their operations. Maybe they've expanded their growing operations, or they've hired more staff because of the demand that's coming in from customers using SNAP. You could look at what products are most purchased with SNAP and how you can market those better to customers. And at the market level, you could also be looking at the economic impact of SNAP at your market, like a percentage of all sales if you're collecting sales data. You could look at, what's the impact of that program on your vendors and on your market. You could look at partnerships that are formed out of this type of program. You could look at how far away are people traveling to use SNAP at the market, that sort of thing. Think about the data that you need for funding as well. And then, data collection can be really simple. It can be pen and paper, or it can be, apps like FM Tracks or Qualtrics or other survey methods. Test out a few different systems and find something that works well for your market, your farm, your vendors, and your customers. And then finally, data was meant to be shared. So like I said, don't collect anything that you don't have a plan for using. As you're creating your surveys and determining what metrics to collect, ask yourself how this data will speak to your SNAP program's process or impact, and how you can evaluate that. And I think that wraps us up, and we are open for questions.
So I can't see you all. So if you have a question, feel free to just go ahead and unmute and jump in, or you can drop it in the chat. Oh, and I do see there's one question to start in the chat.
Yes.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Hey, look, this is the question I had earlier, was about the SNAP. Because what I did was, I'm doing a farm stand, and I got approved. Matter of fact, they supposed to send sent the actual market link since toll. What was it? Toll. I'm kind of new to this. It's toll pay. Yeah, toll pay go. So the thing is, what I was trying to remember what I heard earlier. So I'm setting up my own farm stand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can I have other farmers that sell maybe like meat and other stuff from their farm and have them, like they can rent a booth? But in other words, if they're not set up with EBT and I have the EBT machine, I was hearing about like the tokens or whatever, how could they run their transaction on mine as long as it meets the requirement as far as food wise, by the SNAP, and then I pay them?
Rachel, you want to answer that one?
Yeah. I think it depends on how it looks. If you're having the vendors come to your farm stand and sell, then you might have kind of like a market model where you have tokens. But if they're just giving you product and then you're selling them at your farm stand and then you're paying them for what gets sold, I think it's totally fine to accept EBT on behalf of them. Yeah.
Yeah, because the whole thing is we are basically everybody knew. But put it this way, nobody that I'm in direct contact with, other farmers that I know that farm and stuff like that, they're not EBT or SNAP qualified, right? So they don't even know the process. So right now I'm being the lab rat. And so my whole thing, I haven't said anything to them even about me even signing up. I just want to just kind of figure it out, be the lab rat, see if it works. And then if it do, I just want to know those farmers that because what I was looking at is, can I buy their product from and sell it at my farm stand? And and then just write them a check out of my checking account, you know, for what they, you know, for the, you know, for what they, for what I sold them. So like a consignment, in other words.
Yeah, and I think we see a lot of farm stands and CSA programs do that. You do a little bit of aggregation from other farms.
Yeah, because see, they sell other, they grow other products, and then I, you know, like I said, I do a lot of fruits and vegetables and greens, but I want to have a decent selection for my, you know, for the customers that come in. So, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, great question.
So Tamlin has a hand up. Go ahead, Tamlin.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm new to this, and I've been trying to figure out how to get SNAP onto the farm because we were SNAP recipients for a little while. So it means a lot to us when farmers markets and farmers and things like that accept it. So I got off my break a little late, so I jumped in the middle. But do I just go to Market Link to, I guess, how do I begin the process to ensure that I can offer SNAP from the farm or from a farm stand to those customers?
Yep. So MarketLink actually will help you get authorized, and they'll walk you through that process. So I know there's another question about getting set up with EBT as a vendor. You can go to MarketLink, and we'll Rachel, would you be willing to drop the link to MarketLink in the chat? They'll actually walk you through that step-by-step process and ensure that you're eligible for it. If you're selling food, you most likely are. There's some clear eligibility requirements on the USDA FNS website. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry if it.
Oh, no, yes, ma'am, it does, because we're starting the fruits and vegetables now, and then we're getting the chickens ready for processing. So we just wanted to make sure that we are ahead of the game before all that started to roll out.
Yep. Yeah, you're in a good place then, certainly.
Thank you.
This is Danielle. I had a quick question, if that's okay.
Yep.
Do we use it in our U-pick process as well?
Oh, I'm not getting your question clear here. Would you mind just dropping it in the chat?
Sorry, somebody was off mute. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yep. Okay.
Yeah, no, my question was, can we use SNAP for our U-pick as well as our farm stand?
I think so.
Yeah.
I don't see why not. Yep. I mean, yeah, because if customers are going to the store, they're kind of doing U-pick, right? Because they're picking out the things that they want. So I don't see it being any different.
Yeah, I mean, if you had like a cafe at your farm stand, you're serving, you know, like coffee and baked goods and things like that, you couldn't necessarily use SNAP for that, because again, that's the like eating on site. But any other types of programs where you're selling food through your farm should be eligible. I saw that Adam was off mute. Did you have a question?
I actually did. I was waiting for everybody to get through. The gentleman who asked a question about his farm stand, and we don't have a farm stand per se. We do sell some beef off the farm. We are going to, there's a new farmers market that a local church has started up. We're the only beef vendor there, but I know they're going to have other produce and things like that there. And so to kind of piggyback on his question, if we are EBT authorized to accept payments, can other vendors there who are selling produce or other things that would qualify, can they run their transactions through us for that?
Katie, you want to take it? I can tack on, or I can start.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you can accept SNAP for folks who come to your booth at the market, but you cannot accept SNAP for everybody else at the market unless you're authorized as a market, not a farm. That's the big difference in FNS's eyes. So you could have the individual vendors be authorized, or you can accept SNAP just for customers for your products, but not on behalf of other vendors at a market setting.
Yeah, and
go
ahead.
So I would actually have to be the person marketing those products in order for that to be on the up and up.
Right.
Correct. Yeah, and that has to do with the liability of those products. So if you own those products, then you are the one who is authorized to sell them. So the example that we gave earlier, where the farmers are maybe selling to the other farmer who then is selling by a SNAP, that seems different than what you're asking, which is that, you'd be, yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of the way it rolls.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I want to be mindful of
Thank you.
time. How much time do we have? Is it just done at 1 p.m.? Or I guess, at 1 p.m. You're in my time zone.
We had it set up for 1 o'clock, but if there continue to be questions and if you guys are available, we can go a bit longer. But I don't know what your schedule is like.
Yeah, we will have to take off pretty quick here, but I do want to drop our emails in the account here. If you have follow-up questions or whatever you want us to send to share with folks, like the slides here have links in them to the resources that I mentioned during the presentation. So we can certainly share those. And I think there was one participant who wanted us to add them to the FMC newsletter to get an update on that market link webinar coming up. So happy to do that in the meantime.
Great. Yeah, if you can send me the links to your slides, we'll be sure to get those out to everybody.
Great. Well, thanks for having us, everyone. It was really great to talk to you, and I hope we gave you something to think about and something to plan around. Good luck with getting authorized if that's the decision that you make, and we encourage you to do it. We're here to help in any way that we can. I see there's more newsletter emails being dropped in the chat. So I got
one question.
Oh yeah, okay.
Oh, I just want to quickly that for the farmer that's on that sells the meat products, I wanted to know, can I drop my email to him and he contact me and possibly we can work together on because he can probably be one of my suppliers.
Yeah, he would need to drop
Yes.
just drop your email in the chat box so that you can see that.
Okay, I did that. Just let them know. It just my name is Landis Hunt, and my email is landonusfarm@gmail. So I typed it in the chat room.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, just email me and we'll talk.
Okay, I will do it.
All right, thanks.
Okay, very good. Very good. All right. Well, thank you, Katie and Rachel, so much for your time and for your presentation today. It was very good, very informative. And we'll look forward to sharing those slides and resources with everybody that joined us today. Thank you to everybody that joined us. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow when we'll hear from Megan Lefew with our Center for Profitable Agriculture. Megan's going to talk about ways to create value-added products with surplus or not so pretty fresh farm products. I hope all of you have a great afternoon. Thanks again for being with us.
Thank you. All right, that's the end of class. Okay, what was his name? All right, Deb, you there?